Hello, eighth grade. I hope that you guys have had a beautiful week. I especially hope that you enjoyed your 4-day weekend last week. That was it's nice to have that time off. Regardless, today we get to start on a different gospel. Today we're going to begin taking a look at the Gospel of Mark. Now, over the last few weeks, we've been looking at the Gospel of Matthew. Well, what are the differences between the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Matthew? Well, because it's a gospel, we know that it's about Jesus, right? That Jesus is the prime talker and mover and everything that's happening in the gospel. So every single one of the gospels is about this man, Jesus, right? So Mark is going to be about Jesus as well. But Mark is writing to a different audience. Matthew, Matthew was writing to people who were Jewish like himself. He was writing to the Jewish people. He doesn't try to explain the Jewish customs, or he just and everything he says is tries to talk about things that they would already know, like their like genealogies and holidays and all the things that the Jewish people would just be familiar with. Mark, however, does not do this. Now, Mark himself probably was Jewish, but he was primarily writing to the Gentiles. So, what's the difference between a Jew and a Gentile? Well, that's an important question because we're going to see this pop up over and over and over again. The Jews were a particular race of people. In other words, they were like one large nation or family that all shared the same racial ties. So, in other words, they only married each other. They very much stayed as a single group of people. These Jewish people lived in a place called Israel, right? And in Israel, they lived as that was just their homeland. So they saw everyone who was not Jewish as not Jewish. So for them, you were either a Jew or you were a non-Jew, right? And the reason they thought of it this way is because they knew that God had chosen them in a special way, right? That God had chosen the Jewish people to be, quote unquote, a light to the nations, that God had blessed them and made them his own. And so anyone who was Jewish was part of that promise, was one of the sons of Abraham. But those who were not were outside of that. So there was rules regarding how they were supposed to even deal with people who were not Jewish. They wouldn't be allowed to share food on certain days. They wouldn't be allowed to do a lot of different things together. How they did business together was different. So the Jewish people were very, I don't want to say isolationist, but they were very, very protective of their Jewish culture. Um, and their Jewish way of life. So when Matthew, who is a Jew and a Christian, as he starts moving throughout the world, he realizes that it's his job is to talk about Jesus to people who are not Jewish. Now Luke will do this as well, but that's one of the big differences between Matthew and Mark. Now, Mark is probably the older gospel. We're not really sure. There's some arguments to say that Matthew might be the older gospel. But regardless, Mark is also the shortest gospel, which is why usually it's the most familiar one, because when people want to read the story for the first time, they usually want to read the short version, and that's Mark. Mark is the shorter version. So, Mark is the shorter version. Mark is writing to the Gentiles, but Mark himself is a Jew. So he's going to explain things to that people that Gentiles might not understand. He's going to explain those things. Who was Mark's audience? Who was Mark writing to? Well, to everybody who wasn't Jewish, but most especially, he was probably writing to the Romans, to people especially in Rome who were being persecuted at the time. Um, so he's probably writing this just to strengthen their faith and to make sure they understand and know everything that the apostles taught them. He was a student of Paul's and of Peter's. So he knew both men personally and well. And yeah. So I want to talk a little bit today about how Mark looks at Jesus, right? Mark looks at Jesus a bit different than Matthew. Remember, Matthew was all about talking about Jesus in messianic terms. Messianic means that he was going to be the Messiah that the Jewish people had been waiting for. Mark, however, doesn't really take that approach because he knows the Romans won't really know what he's talking about if he talks about the Messiah. So instead, Mark talks about Jesus in the form of the mystery of who this man is, the mystery, right? So what we see as we look at Mark is that Jesus is slowly revealing himself. He's not just coming out and saying, "Hey, I'm God. I'm the guy you've been waiting for." He doesn't quite do it that way. Instead, you see him slowly and carefully showing who he is. We see this a lot as he starts to do healing, right? In Mark, whenever Jesus heals someone, he always asks them to do something for him. He says, "Don't tell people what I did. You're healed. Everything's great. I'd ask that you just not talk about it." Now, of course, they do anyway. They can't help it. They were just healed of something terrible. Something wonderful happened to them, and they can't help but talk about it. But you see that Jesus is kind of trying to keep, well, in modern parlance, we'd say he's trying to keep on the down low, right? He's trying not to make a big fuss. Why is this? Well, Jesus' messianic secret, his secretive nature, is all about him making sure that he has time to say and do everything he needs to do before he's killed. You see, Jesus knows he's going to die. He knows once people start to realize who he is, that that's going to end in his death. He's prepared for that. But he's trying to make sure that there's time for him to do all the stuff he needs to do. So you find that he's not terribly open in Mark's gospel about everything that he's doing. He's doing things and saying things and healing people and teaching people, but he's revealing himself much slower than he does in the other gospels. Let me give you an example. Just a quick example. Let's see. That is a different one. All right. Cleansing of a leper. A leper came to him and, kneeling down, begged him and said, "If you wish, you could make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, "I do will it. Be made clean." And the leprosy left him immediately. And when he was made clean, then, this is the key part, warning him sternly, he dismissed him at once. Then he said to him, "See that you tell no one anything, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof enough for them." But the man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places, and people kept coming to him from everywhere. So we see this healing, and this healing is beautiful. Oh my gosh. This man comes to him and he has leprosy. I don't know if you know what leprosy is, but it's a skin disease, and one that's really, really ugly. And because of this, the Jewish people were really scared of getting this disease. So the second you had anything that looked like leprosy, you were kicked out of the town. You were kicked out of your family. No one could talk to you. No one could see you because they didn't want anybody else to get it. And because of this, lepers felt very, very lonely and sad, right? So this leper comes to Jesus. He's not supposed to do that, by the way. He's supposed to stay far away from people. But he comes to Jesus anyway, and he says, "If you wish, if you wanted to, I know that you could heal me." And Jesus says, "I do want to. I do want to." It's a beautiful, beautiful story of love. And he heals him. But then he asks him, Please don't tell people about me. Instead, go to the priest. That's the person who would be in charge of whether or not this man still has leprosy. Show him that you don't have leprosy and offer what God normally would offer for the curing of a disease. But don't mention me. But the man can't do it. The man is so thankful, so overwhelmed with joy that he goes and speaks anyway. You can hardly blame him. His whole life has changed, and all because of this wonderful man. And it's hard for him to be silent. But because of this, Jesus doesn't come into towns. He stays outside of towns. He stays hidden and slowly tries to reveal himself. Now, part of this, it happens in his teaching too. That as Jesus is teaching, he's a bit mysterious. So I'd like to share with you one of his teachings, right? And this particular one is meant to kind of show you that he's explaining things, but he's not telling people everything. On another occasion, he began to teach by the sea. A very large crowd gathered around him, and he got into a boat on the sea and sat down, and the whole crowd was beside the sea on the land. And he taught them in length in parables. And in the course of his instruction, he said to them, all right, so he's teaching on a boat just outside so everybody can hear him. Hear this. A sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Other seed fell on rocky ground where it had little soil. It sprang up at once because the soil was not deep. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and it withered for lack of roots. Some seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it produced no grain. And some seed fell on rich soil and produced fruit, and it came up and grew and yielded 30, 60, and 100-fold. And he said, whoever has ears ought to hear. And he stops right there. So he tells this story of a sower, a man who's planting seeds, throwing seeds, and the seeds land everywhere. This sower is a bad sower. He's just throwing them all over the place, right? He's throwing them on the path. He's throwing them on the rocks. He's throwing them in the thorns. He's throwing them in where they belong to, in the field. And the seeds are all growing up according to where they were thrown, right? The ones on the path, they get ate up by birds. Where the soil's bad, they spring up, but then they die off. Where he throws it in the thorns, the weeds kill it. And when he throws it in the rich soil, it grows and produces fruit. And then he says nothing and walks away. And everybody's sitting there going, what exactly is he talking about? I mean, I know this guy is, important because I see all the healings that he's been doing, and I've heard about all the wonderful work, but I just have no idea what he's talking about. First of all, why is this sower throwing seeds where they don't belong? And what does it mean that they're living in, the seeds are growing differently? What's he talking about? Is he talking about school? Is this a metaphor for how to live a happy life? I don't understand it. And that's exactly where Jesus leaves. He lets them not understand. And then later, he comes to his apostles and he says something more. When he was alone, those present, the 12, questioned him about the parables. What was that about, Jesus? And he answered them, the mystery of the kingdom of God has been granted to you. In other words, I'm not telling everybody everything I mean yet, but I'm telling you 12 who are with me, because you're going to continue after I'm gone. You need to know everything. But to those, so the mystery of the kingdom of God has been granted to you, but to those outside, everything comes in parables, so that they may look and see, but not perceive, and hear and listen, but not understand, in order they might not be converted and be forgiven. In other words, there's time going on here. He needs time. Jesus said to them, don't you understand the parable? Then he explains it. Then how will you understand any of the parables? The sower is the one who gives the word, ones who people tell people about me. These are the ones on the path. And then the sower sows the word. He tells everybody about Jesus, right? And then he tells what each one of the different people are, right? There are ones on the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear, Satan comes at once and takes away the word. And there's one sown in rocky ground who hear the word, receive it at once, but then they don't last. They have no roots. And then when anything scary comes along, they walk away. Those sown among thorns are another sort. They're the people who hear the world, but worldly anxiety, lure of riches, all sorts of things choke and take the word away from them. And the ones that sown on rich soil are the ones that hear the word of God and accept it. So he explains it to his disciples, but he doesn't explain it to everybody who's listening. They're just supposed to figure it out. And Jesus is this mysterious character almost all the way through Mark. Like through the first half of the book, he's just as kind of mysterious. He's slowly revealing himself. He's not showing everything that he thinks right at once, right? So Mark is the gospel of the mysterious Jesus. I wanted to share with you one of the particular parables, not a parable, one of the events that to me is really important for a couple of reasons. One, because I love boats, and Mark has the one with the most boats in it. But this, more than that. On that day, as evening drew on, he said to them, let's cross to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. So, leading the crowd, they took with him a boat just as he was, and all the other boats were with him. A violent squall came up, and waves were breaking over the boat so that it was filling up with water. Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. So imagine you're one of the apostles here, and you've gotten a boat and you're sailing across a really, really big sea. It's not the ocean, but it's a sea. It's way bigger than a lake, right? They're sailing across it, and so it's a long journey. So Jesus takes a nap. He goes to sleep. Now, as he's sleeping, a storm comes, and the storm's bad. Now realize, all of his disciples are fishermen. They've been living in the water their whole life. They're not scared of water. They're not scared of a little weather. But this storm has them terrified. So this is a bad storm, right? And the water is coming over the boat and getting in and starting to fill the boat up. And Jesus is still just laying there on a cushion, asleep. They wake him up, say, Teacher, do you not care that we are about to die? He woke up, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, Quiet, be still. And then, suddenly, there was a great calm. He asked them, Why are you terrified? Do you not yet have faith? And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, Who is this, whom even the wind and the sea obey? This mysteriousness of Jesus becomes more and more prevalent even to the apostles who are there. Like they know that this shouldn't happen the way it did. They know nature of the sea so perfectly well. And they watch this happen. They're taken aback. But notice what Jesus says. Why are you afraid? Why are you so scared? Does not God control everything? Aren't you fine? So as you look at the mystery of Jesus, I would ask you the same question. Are you ever frightened? Are you ever worried? Why? Doesn't God have everything under control? Aren't you and I perfectly fine? I love this gospel because this reminds me that there is nothing that can frighten me. that there's nothing that can take away the love of God from me. So I don't need to worry about anything. So this week, don't worry about anything. Do the best you can at everything you can and let God take care of the rest. I hope you guys have a beautiful week. God bless you. Looking forward to finishing Mark next week.